Hello again, it's Chris DeLeon, TA for LMC 6310, taught by Dr. Jay Bolter at Georgia Tech's Digital Media Program in Atlanta. This is for the computers and expressive medium. In the previous video, I showed how to save an image file out from your screen buffer in your application, as well as how to set up a title screen and how to accept keyboard input. For this video, I'm going to be looking at using APIs, or application programming interfaces, that allow our program to reach out to the web or other outside sources and utilize those to get information back, like from Twitter or from Flickr. There's a myriad of websites out there you can find APIs for. We're going to show how you can integrate those into your processing application to do things outside the scope of your local file system, to do things out, integrating dynamic, real-time, updated web kind of content to it. I want to emphasize that the tutorial I'm introducing here is very much following an example written from Blueprint, spelled like this, blprnt.blg, Blueprint blog, I guess blog.blueprint.com, by Jared Thorpe, who I'm entirely thankful to and owe this tutorial to. I've had to update it and improve it a bit, or at least adapt it, because versions have changed since I think this was written in 2011 initially. The example that I'm borrowing from, 2011 tutorial. A couple years have passed, processing has changed, Twitter 4J has adjusted a little bit, and so consequently, I've had to make some tweaks, but that's what it's based on. Like I say, credit where it's due. So our first steps for doing this are we're going to need Twitter 4J, the library. And that's something which is going to help handle some of the machinery for us in terms of interfacing to Twitter's API within processing. So we're going to go to Twitter 4J. I just Googled it, and we're going to scroll down to download. We want this version here. Let's grab 303.zip. It's the one I'm basing this video on. I'm going to download that. In the meantime, over in processing, let's go ahead and save our application to create a directory for our project. Remember that until we've saved the sketch, there's no folder, and we're going to need to save part of Twitter 4J into a relative path next to our processing PDE sketch. So I'll put this one here. We'll call it Twitter. Save. Okay. And as is often the case, we're going to navigate over there. Let's see. Documents. Processing. Let me get this out from behind my video. Made that mistake once before. And so now we want the one that ends in Twitter. There it is. So there's our sketch file. And again, for me on my Mac, that was in Documents, Processing, then the name of my sketch. On a Windows machine, it's likely to be under My Documents, Processing, and then the sketch folder. Okay, the file is downloaded. I'm going to show that in the Finder. Let's see, I was updating Steam recently, trying out Save the Date. I'm glad to keep my save folder at least that clean. I'm going to download the zip file over here, or I'm going to copy it over. I'm going to unzip it, which you could probably right-click and extract or double-click in a modern operating system. But there's really only one file from this entire directory we want. So I'm going to knock out the old zip file. And here in lib, you see this one here, Twitter 4J core 303. That's the one file we want from this. So within the Twitter 4J, when I unzipped it, inside the lib folder, Twitter 4J core 303.jar, I'm going to pull that out of those folders, delete the rest of that stuff so we don't get confused. And now I'm going to create a new subfolder called code and put the jar file in there. And that's where our sketch is going to be looking for it when we start making references to special classes and things that are defined inside that jar file. And now we can start to write our application around it. So let me get rid of this. I guess we don't need that anymore. Okay, so here for our application, let's have configuration builder, CB equals new configuration builder. I'm going to expand my windows a tad. Hopefully I'll stay behind the video. Okay. Twitter instance, query for Twitter. Remember, void setup happens right when the program starts, one time. And now for this, we're going to need to use a special API key, which we're going to retrieve here from the internet in a moment. But first of all, let's just write the code that we're going to need. OAuth consumer key here. And there's going to be a whole series of really similar looking lines, so I'm actually going to copy and paste some of these. Secret here. Consumer secret here. And where I have bold characters, you're going to fill those in with your own values once we fetch those from the Twitter API place. OAuth access token. Oh, caps lock still on. Access token. And I'm just copying and pasting because these lines have so much in common. Access token secret. Other secret. Access token. There we go. And once those are connected, and that's what's going to help authorize us with their server. So these things are necessary for Twitter to know how, when, and with what intensity their APIs are being used. It prevents abuse of the service, unfair balance or unfair use of their servers or services, and so on. We're going to create a Twitter instance, which we declared up top. Twitter instance, new Twitter factory .get instance. And here inside the parentheses, I'm going to put a break line here just so it all fits. cb.build. Remember, break lines are harmless in programming. Build. Sorry for the typos. Okay. Remember, break lines are harmless in programming, so this all really could be on one line, but I'm keeping a large font, so it's hopefully easier for you to see on your screen. And next up, we're going to define query for Twitter as new query. Pound YOLO. We can search for anything, but this is something I'm pretty sure Twitter is going to have some tweets come back from. And then, as always in setup, we want to set our screen size. Let's say 640, 440 that fit underneath my screen here on the video. I'm then going to clear the background with black. I'm going to call a function we're going to write called fetch and draw tweets. This just means that one time it's going to hit the API, get back a list of results from the tweets, and then print those Twitter feeds out. So let's start to write that function. Void fetch and draw tweets. Remember, so these voids that we put out here are declaring functions. Certain ones like setup and draw get called automatically by processing constantly, as opposed to when we use a label like this ourselves, we can kind of come up with anything as long as it's not a built-in label. We couldn't call it setup or draw or key press. Those are built in and it would be a conflict. But we can define our own, and when a code gets here, it just jumps to our label. It's kind of a good way to segment out our code. We're going to have a try-catch. We're not going to talk a whole lot about try-catch. This is something which is a traditional Java pattern that allows sort of error handling. So if something goes wrong, we'll be able to have the code print out the error and sort of bail mid-process in a way. You'll see kind of how it fits together. Query results equals results. Query results equals Twitter instance dot search. And here the argument for search is going to be query for Twitter, the one we defined above as a new query, YOLO, with a pound sign. For those who aren't frequent Twitter users, those pound signs are used to called a hashtag. It's used to index tweets, make them easily searchable. Array list tweets equals array list result dot get tweets, and that's going to give us an array list, which you'll remember from our other videos is how we dealt with, if we had a whole chain full of circles to keep track of the bouncing movements of. When we had a long list of mouse trail positions to keep track of, an array list was our way of doing that. The array list is just going to be a structure which is going to contain the information that came back from our Twitter call for that query, so we can then iterate through them and draw them or do things with them, which we're going to do here. For int I equals 0, I is less than tweets.size, I++. And there's a special type for these. Whenever you're seeing these special kind of classes, status, query result, configuration builder, query, that you haven't maybe seen elsewhere, those are what are being found inside Twitter4j core inside of our code folder when we press play. So that's how and why we can use those for this application, even though you won't really see those elsewhere, at least not in our demos for these kind of things. T equals status, tweets.getI. And remember, so if we have an array list, we have to use get I to tell, like, give me the fourth one, the fifth one, the 0th as being the first one. We have to cast it as a status because the array list is agnostic to what type of data is stored inside there. And by setting it as a status, it tells the computer what variables and what functions we can expect to find on that block of data. Status is declaring that the type of our variable t is status, which there's certain things, again, we can do to status. And now from that, let's extract certain parts. So status has get user on it. And these are things you can find when you Google for the API of Twitter, or for Twitter4j rather. And get user contains a lot of information about the user, their bio, their probably a link to their pic and so on. Or we can use .getName after it to straight up get the name of the user. And without the parentheses, that's what it's doing. It's finding the get user and then the get name. This would be the same as if I had instead done this. User, the user, t.getUser. If I replace this block here, this code would do exactly the same thing. If I wanted a separate handle on the user, I could then call getName on the user. Again, this is documented through Twitter4j. In fact, let's show you that API a little bit. Oh, problem. Sorry. School privacy things are up on the screen, so I'm probably going to blue that out. It's my easy way to draw boxes in here. But okay, now that we're back on my screen, let's do a quick Google for Twitter4j API. And here we've got, like, say, Java Docs 303. Okay. And in here, this is where we can find information about what we can do with the different things that we deal with. So Twitter4j, response status, Twitter base, user. So there on user is where we could do these things like get ID, get name is the one we've used here. There's all kinds of things to do about their profile URL. You'd be surprised the number of calls we can make right to the user's data structure. All that's coming back to us. But my point, though, is that we can take the user, we can sort of skip this step here by just putting our call right there and stacking it. So it's going to take the status, get the user from the status, and then get the name from that user. And that's all we really care about for the sake of this application. We're going to get the message from that status update, which is simply called getText. And again, these are things you could find in Java doc for Twitter4j on twitter4j.org. And next we print that message out, which, for starters, let's not even print to the screen. Let's just print out down to the console, down below in the black box, because we know that's kind of an easier space to work in. Let's put user, colon, or pluses just concatenate strings together. So we should see like hobby game dev, colon, whatever I tweeted from my blog. Chris DeLeon, colon, whatever I tweeted from my personal account, and so on. And, oh, because we have a try statement, remember it appears the try, we need to have a corresponding catch. Twitter exception E, or TE for Twitter exception. Print line, couldn't connect, plus TE. And so again, the way this works is that if anything throws a Twitter exception, as being thing into in Java, anywhere inside the try statement, it'll bail out on the code that was happening in there, jump to this error condition, and print out the error message that it received from when a problem happened. So because we haven't set up our API keys, for example, this is going to probably throw that error, which we'll try here in a second. Also, we're starting to stack braces at the bottom of the program, which, like I say, I always like to label those and start to get. You start to get a number of braces by each other. It's very easy to lose track of how many you have there. There's a couple of solutions to that. One is being really disciplined about your indentation. You'll notice every time I go into braces, I move in 2 spaces. You can also go to Edit Auto Format, and it'll try to clean things up for you a little bit. It'll also lose some of your manual alignment, as I've made a point of putting things in certain places. In addition to that, putting little comments. So, end of catch Twitter exception. End of, get the name of this function, fetch and draw tweets. And now I'm not going to run into that situation that new programmers often do of fiddling around at the bottom of the file trying to add and remove braces to get the program to work. You don't want to go there. Braces problems can be particularly hair-raising to wrestle with because it can wind up putting your error in a different file or being really confused about where the error is, because the braces are the computer's clues about where to point you for problems. And if they're not in the right places, like I say, it throws things in a right loop. Likewise, if you're missing a colon or whatever, semicolon, don't sweat it. When I press play now, I'm expecting the error. Can I find class Twitter factor? Oh, Twitter factory. Errors will happen in programming, but that's definitely supposed to be Twitter factory. I apologize for the typo earlier. I press play. Yep, there we go. We have a Twitter exception. Invalid or expired token. Couldn't connect, authorization credentials. all what we expected because we haven't filled these in. So let's go get our authorization credentials. We're going to Google Twitter API key, because that's what we want. How to get my API key, Twitter developers. That seems promising. Go to here and log in if necessary. Okay, username. I'll log in as me. Password. Glad you can't see that. Okay, now we can create an application. Let's call this processing demo for video. Description, I'm just making a short demo video to help others use the Twitter API. These don't need to be especially detailed. You probably don't even need to fill in too much information at all. You just, they're curious what their API is being used for, and they have every right to know because it's their service you're hitting. It wants to know the website where users can find or use information about this. I'm just going to point them towards my personal website. You can point them towards the class website if you're in the class as a student, your own personal site, whatever. You could put a placeholder there, as you can see here, if you don't have one, so don't sweat it. Don't need a callback URL, developer rules. It's worth reading these, especially if you're trying to do a real sort of larger service. If you don't play by the rules, they can disconnect your account. They can ban your use of the API, all kinds of things. We're kind of working in a sandbox here. We're being careful, respectful of their bandwidth and so on. I don't think we're going to have any problems, but it'd be worthwhile to read that again if you're going to do anything real with this, as opposed to just little sample demonstrations. Okay, I'll do my CAPTCHA. CAPTCHAs are fun. Create the Twitter application. Okay, processing demo for video. And so now here I've got OAuth keys and things, which you'll see I have to blue out on my screen. So down there, if we scroll all the way to the bottom, we have to use the access token. So by default, we don't have an access token yet, but we're going to need that, as you saw in the program over here. So I'm going to click Create My Access Token. I scroll back down. Again, I apologize, I'm going to blue out so much my screen. It may not show up immediately. It can take it a moment. But if I refresh that page that I'm on, then yes, then they show up listed down here under Your Access Token. So I'll start copying these things in. I realize this may be tricky since you won't be able to see these sections on my screen. But consumer key, there's my number there. And I'm going to paste that into here. Consumer secret, I'm going to paste that number into here. I don't want you to have my numbers because I don't want you fiddling with my API stuff. I want the full key there. And now we need the OAuth access token. Let's look for the matching number. Down here is the access token. It's both parts. And then token secret, this line right here. Copy and paste that in. Okay, and now when I press play, there we go. I got a whole bunch of tweets coming down here that have #YOLO in them. Now another point about what we're doing, because we're not drawing anything to the screen yet, is instead of printing them out down there, wouldn't it be nicer if we put them on the graphical area for our application? And so we'll do that. So here we're going to say text instead of print line. Remember, print line goes to the console, text makes it graphical on the screen. So we're going to keep the same basic message structure. I think that really works just fine. Followed by, we can give it a horizontal position and a vertical position. Now we want to stagger these vertically. We want to make each one go lower on the screen based on which tweet it is. And so we could say, for example, I times 15. So this will start 15 pixels from the top of the screen. And then for each extra tweet being printed, I is going to be one more. Remember, for the first time through this loop, I is 0. So this would be 0, 0 times 15. So the position that will be 15. For the next I, as it loops through to the second tweet, it'll be 1. So it'll be at 30. 1 times 15 plus 15, 30. And then it'll be down to 45, and so on, in 15-unit increments for each I from that loop. And there's actually additionally 2 things we can do. We're going to actually let that happen first before I explain what those are. And so there's our tweets. And as you can see, we have a lot of sort of rect information here. Let me get my tokens off the screen so I can quit trying to blot that out, because that's going to make this video kind of hard to look at. There we go. So I've got all the tweets printed out. And you'll see there's some overlap here. There's some really messy junk, and a lot of them go off the edge of the screen. There's a number of problems here, of course. So there's a few ways we can deal with this. One, we can expand as a lazy solution how much space we give them, so there won't be as much overlapping each other. And you'll see they still go off the right side of the screen. We can actually set as 2 more parameters on a text field in graphics, a width and a height. So if we make this width minus 20, then that's going to be the width of the screen minus, since we're starting 20 pixels over from the side. And let's say 40 as the height. And this should wrap the text within those boxes. And so you see now when it goes into a second line, it wraps a bit. We're skipping too much space now. So we didn't need a full 35. Let's try, or we didn't need 45. Let's try 30. That looks better. We're getting most of them. And we could even kind of make this scrollable through various ways. So if I subtract from the Y position mouse Y, as a really kind of lazy hack to create scrolling effect, when I mouse down, so here's the problem. We don't have a draw function. Remember, so unless a processing application has a draw function, it's not happening continuously. This happens once when the program starts. But let's change that. Let's make this program run constantly. Void draw. I'm going to move the background 0 call and that into here. And now the one thing that might be different here is that actually we don't want to be hitting the API 30 times a second. That could be a problem. At some point, they're going to cut us off. They're going to start sending us back blank data because you're just not allowed to hammer their server in that way with constant requests. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to separate out the fetch and the draw tweets. That'll be good practice for us anyway. I'm going to create a function called fetch tweets and one called draw tweets. See how I did that? I copied the function name. We're going to gut this function, rearrange it a bit here in a second. Okay, so we have a core functionality here for fetch tweets, is what this one already did. And you'll see that the work that hits the server is here where it does the Twitter instance. Oops, sorry. Here where it does the Twitter instance search on it. And then it has this relatively harmless stuff of a local iteration through an array list. So what I propose is let's make this array list global. So there's our array list tweets. Because we declare it globally, we want to get rid of the declaration here. This declaration is making a local value that will only exist within the scope of these braces for fetch tweets. By removing it, it's going to instead use our global array list tweets. And now we just move the code away from drawing that array list out of fetch tweets into a new function we're going to call draw tweets. I'm going to indent it backwards. I can command left bracket, right bracket to shift full indentations at a time for multiple lines, or you could, edit auto format as we said before. And so there we go. So now fetch tweets separately, only once when the program starts, here in setup, will happen. That's going to do the query to the Twitter API. It's going to get us back. It's going to populate our array list of tweets. And that's the entire fetch tweets function at this point. Much smaller, much shorter. It's actually kind of nice just to carve up our functions this way, right? And we have another function now separate from that one, which will go through that array list to however many are in the array list and print out that data without bothering the server, without pestering Twitter 30 times a second for more information. And so essentially, we have our fetch tweets in setup. So one time, it's going to get that information from the server. There's my value. It's going to blue out again. And then here in draw, it's going to call it constantly, which is going to give us back the values. So there's that. And now because it's being drawn constantly, now this line matters where I did this minus mouse Y so that I can move the mouse down to kind of scroll. So if I had more information than fit on one screen, I could kind of scroll it in this way. Remember, these are just numbers in code. We could make that mouse X, and we could use the X-axis to scroll vertically, even though it doesn't make any sense. We could add mouse Y and mouse X to these coordinates so that we basically can use our mouse to position the top left corner of it. This is probably less useful since all it does is puts more of it off the screen. But remember, this is happening inside draw, so it's happening constantly. And we can draw anything else we want in there. We could draw images, we could draw layouts, we could dynamically render information based on these tweets. We could hit the Flickr API, which I'll cover soon in another video, but kind of split it up so it's not all too much in one, which would allow us to get pictures based on words in those tweets to display on the screen. So APIs are a clearly super powerful thing that allow us to do basically work with information outside of our program. And I encourage you to Google for APIs to find out more ways you can integrate APIs into your programs. It allows you to do a lot more things than you can do with just local files because it can reflect the outside world and the coolness of the internet. Thanks for tuning in. This is LMC 6310. I'm TA Chris DeLeon, and hopefully I'll see more of you soon in the videos that follow. Thanks. Bye-bye.